This situation between Yuji and Sukuna left a lot of ideas within my head. On one hand, I didn't know how long this was going to last. I didn't know how many people would join the fight, how massive or explosive it would become. But then on the other hand, I am more than glad that Maki was the one to join this fight. Even though it has come to a conclusion, probably better to say a pause, I am more than glad that Maki was the one to kind of initiate things a little bit further, to really put pressure onto Sukuna, and I guess to also fill up the power level discrepancy between everyone currently. Don't get me wrong, I think the previous chapter was entirely Yuji. As cool as Sukuna is within Megami's body, that was Yuji at his core. Anger, the overwhelming aggression, the transformation into the calamity that he's most likely becoming, it's a great starting point. It's using that aggression that makes for an interesting conversation, that makes for a development within Yuji himself as a person, either outlive everyone or be the only sacrifice within the story. Basically what I mean by this is that we don't see overwhelming aggression all too often. So with Yuji, it feels right, it feels perfect, and it feels like a change within the narrative. And rightfully so, because the change is very big. What helps Yuji's overwhelming aggression within this chapter, because one could argue you can't fully gas it constantly. You can't put the pedal to the floor every single week. You have to balance it out. So what better way to balance it out than to have Maki come into the picture and be so cool and calculated about everything. She is eerily calm. She's quite literally the opposite of Yuji. And with how her previous encounter went down, this makes a lot of sense. She's evolved, she's adapted, she's truly freed herself from the shackles of aggression and from her past and from her trauma. She's healed, to put simply. Not entirely, but she's done a lot of legwork to make it so. And you can see it so beautifully within this chapter. The dynamic between these two characters against someone like Sukuna, who is playful, unpredictable, likes to torment his opponents. So what you get is a three-way dynamic. You get overwhelming aggression from Yuji, you get that playful nature from Sukuna, and you get this eerily calm approach from Maki. Who knew that Yuji and Maki's fighting styles would work so well with one another? Almost perfectly. They both use hand-to-hand combat, but the way they integrate with one another is seamless. Almost like they've been fighting with each other for years upon years, yet realistically this is kind of the first time, especially to this level. What helps aid both of them is Megami's involvement. So he's still in there, he's still fluctuating and contorting the situation for Sukuna so he can't actually use all of his power. But it's not just outright annoying, it's not just outright disturbing what Sukuna is doing. Instead, it's very specific, it's timely. So the overall effect is that Sukuna can only use about 10% of his actual power, which is still definitely quite a lot. But the more valuable information that you find out is that right before Sukuna does anything massive when it comes to attacks, Megami is starting to manipulate the situation just a little bit and dampen the cursed energy output that Sukuna is putting in. This is drastically different to just lowering Sukuna's overall cursed energy output. This is evaluating the situation and the amount of power that's going to come from a future attack, and within that moment, dampening it just enough to throw Sukuna off guard, to throw him for a loop. This doesn't really have a massive perceivable effect, like you don't really notice it all too much within the chapters or abilities being lopsided or loopy, but you will notice when Sukuna himself recognizes it, that his attacks or powers seem a little bit weaker in comparison to what they normally are, and that's when he figures out that Megami is the one actually doing it. I think this is a great way to help at least make the situation a little bit more believable. It puts it into perspective, it brings a scope to the situation, allows a lot more flexibility and even more freedom, because in reality, if Sukuna is 100% power, this fight goes entirely differently. Knowing that he's dampened quite a lot and knowing that Megami is doing it in specific points of periods that throws Sukuna off guard is very intelligent from Megami. It's not enough for Megami to move his own body, but is definitely a start. Just this explanation is enough to spark the idea that maybe Megami is still savable, that maybe there is a way to reverse this situation to get Megami back, or expel Sukuna from his body, especially more so with how this chapter ends. I will say Maki's introduction is beautiful. She kind of just rocks up. No one expects her to be there. Sukuna did not sense her. She's truly living up to the design of her character. And the more that we see of her, the more incredibly portrayed she actually is. Within a moment like this, watching her go hand to hand with Sukuna and genuinely get the upper hand in a lot of situations is really nice. Mind you, she's not using her sword, and that's because of Megumi's body, and worried that the effects of her sword will have an irreversible effect on Megumi's body, which makes sense. Her judgment is very crystal clear straight from the get-go. So you're seeing kind of the biggest hurdle for Sukuna right off the bat. It's not Yuji that he has to be worried about, but eventually it will be. Like, that is a genuine problem Yuji will fill, no doubt in my mind. But currently Maki is the one to be worried about, and he gives her special attention. He makes sure to kind of focus a lot more perception-wise on her. Seeing Yuji and Maki fight so effortlessly with one another, like they've been doing it for years, is a beautiful sight. Their flow, their efficiency, their output, everything just feels so well synergized. I would like to believe that this is Maki making herself applicable to working with someone. She seems very dominant in this regard because Yuji has always naturally fit with other people. He's always fought alongside other people extremely well. And even the concept of his character being somewhat of a tool usually doubles down in the fights that he has. This situation is kind of similar. Maki does actually use him as a weapon of some sort, whether it be a distraction or a physical object. It's not entirely controlling, but you can see the dynamics between them pretty nicely, especially with an opponent like Sukuna where they have to be on guard. Seeing Yuji's aggression not necessarily control him, but fuel back into his concentration by the looks of it is very nice, especially when you see someone like a Maki fighting beside you that is so calm and orientated and level-headed about everything. Even the damage that Maki takes, which is barely anything, she's not fazed by it, impresses Sukuna. He's actually intrigued by her. This fight doesn't last for all too long, but it's enough to provide a lot of entertainment for us and a visual clarity to where these characters stand against a 10% Sukuna, so to speak. Still, Sukuna manages to pull off some very powerful abilities. We get to see a spiderwebbed cleave for the first time, which to me doesn't actually seem like a genuine technique, like something that's within Sukuna's arsenal. It just seems like an expansion of cleave, and he's just applying it in a way that is similar to a spiderweb with that name. That sounds weird because it sounds like the exact same thing, like, oh, well, why isn't it a technique then? Like, what's the difference? More so for me, I like to believe that Sukuna has such a great understanding of cursed energy that instead of having outright techniques or abilities, he can kind of just take one and stretch it however he wants. Unfortunately, we do get interrupted, but it's within a pretty cool way. Urame, the person that is working with Sukuna and prepping the quote-unquote bath that is about to happen, pulls up and uses their maximum output. Entire wave of ice and frost just covers the battlefield and freezes around Maki and Yuji. And this is where we see kind of the future of Kaisen lining up rather nicely with where we go from here. It's something that I've always enjoyed, even though we've gotten very little of it, is the back and forth between Sukuna and Urame. We know they've had a pretty healthy relationship for a very long time by the looks of it, with how comfortable they are with one another, and it doesn't just seem like they're serving each other's purpose. I would love to know or even see the history between them, how they came to know each other, how they perceive the world, or what things that they believe in, because they obviously share a lot of mutual things. Urame's doing a lot to prepare this bath, and even Sukuna recognizes that this body is still incomplete. So this makes me think that the bath is going to be some sort of, I guess, neutralizer to bring Sukuna out in his fullest and have him completed within whatever body he sits within that bath. But there's also the chance that the bath is double backing as whatever Kenjaku is trying to spawn. Because we see Kenjaku at the beginning and he's the one that actually brings Urame to where Sukuna is now. So it has somewhat of a double usage. Whatever Sukuna is trying to complete and finalize for himself is obviously going to aid Kenjaku. Just remember there is a ton of cursed energy pooling into this bath, and I'm sure Urame has managed to capture a lot of it, if not all of it. Speaking of their relationship, I feel bad for Yuji because he manages to break out of this ice and you see him chasing after Sukuna and Urame, and in Sukuna's words, he looks pathetic, but it actually reminds him of someone. That same look and style, and I don't know if this is a reference to Yuji's bloodline or where he comes from, but that both of them recognize the similarities between Yuji and this other person. They're just menaces. They're evil, but they work so brilliantly with each other. They're both just grinning and laughing and smiling about how pathetic Yuji looks. So I do wonder if there's a flashback here. I wonder if we do get to see maybe a little bit of Sukuna and Urume's past, but how this connects to Yuji. Who does he remind them of? And is it just a coincidence, or is this where Kenjaku got his idea from, where he got the ingredients to create the cursed wombs? Undoubtedly, it is a sad day for Yuji. He could not do anything, he could not save his friend, he could not capture or stop whatever Sukuna was doing, and they're on track to go to the bath and to start this massive merger process. They're going to be playing catch up from here on out. But I do hope that even though there's no real positive outcome for Yuji and this situation currently, that we do get some sort of flashback away from this situation. Obviously, we could just steamroll towards it, try and follow them, try to find out what to do next, and just regroup with everyone to move forward towards it. Logically, that makes sense. But this seems like a perfect kind of plate to find out a lot more context for Sukuna, for Urume, for Kenjaku, and whatever Yuji is and his bloodline 1,000 years ago. So I think it's a great time to learn about what the bath actually is, what it may have been originally designed for, and how it is now currently being used by Sukuna in a different way than what was maybe intended. Either way, it has been a brilliant time, but I want to know all of your thoughts on the chapter right now. Thank you.